Sound check, 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody. We'll commence this transportation committee in about 30 seconds. Is that good, Lane? 1 minute. 1 minute. A minute and a half. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to meeting number 8 of Transportation Committee, a very popular and wild committee. Thank you for coming out today. I want to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence is nurtured and continues to be on this land. I'm going to ask our committee coordinator, our amazing Rosa, to do the roll call, please.
Councillor Bradley,
Here.
Councillor DeRuse,
I'm here.
Councillor Desroches,
Here.
Councillor Devine,
Here.
Councillor Dudas,
Présent.
Councillor Gower,
Here.
Councillor Johnson,
Here.
Councillor Lowe, Councillor Luloff.
Good morning, Rosa.
Good morning. Councillor Troster,
Here.
Vice Chair Kitts,
Here.
and Chair Tierney.
I'm present. Thank you very much.
Chair, you have quorum.
Luloff has the best microphone. Can I get one of those, please? Thank you. So I'm going to move right into the agenda. Declarations of interest. We have none to date. Confirmation of the minutes, August 24th, 2023. Are those minutes carried? Thank you. Responses to inquiries are in front of us. We have delegations that have signed up for item 4.3, the Queen Elizabeth driveway closure. I think it's only fair that we allow them to speak. So can we lift this and add this to the agenda with the will of the committee? Thank you very much. Apologies about that. Correspondence, we do have some speakers, like I said, for that item. Let's just go through the rest of the agenda and see what we can clear here first. Item 5.1, status update transportation committee inquiries and motions for the period ending September 19th. Obviously, we have no speakers. We have no delegations. Is this item received? Thank you. Councillors' items 6.1 eastbound permissive protected left turn on Innis Road by Councillor Luloff. We've been working on this for quite a while. It's a very important file. If there's any member of council wishes to hold this item, please let me know. Seeing none, is this item carried? Oh, and if you saw that, Sean Devine gave a thumbs up enthusiastically there, Councillor Luloff. So that is complete.
Thank you very much.
In camera items. So I guess we're going to go back to. Okay, this might be quick. We'll see how this goes. So we'll go back to the first item that has been pulled and added to the agenda. 4.3, the Queen Elizabeth driveway closure. I do believe we do have a presentation with some information from our wonderful staff member, Phil Landry. Phil.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members, for having me today. So today I'm just going to sort of give an overview of the data collection work that we did the 2023 and 2022. So I'll just wait for the slide to. Okay. Well, maybe I'll get started while we're waiting for the technical. I'll just give sort of an overview. So this QED, as you all know, was closed starting in 2020 when the pandemic for active usage, and back in 2020 when the volumes were much lower than up to 65-70% because people were at home. This was something that was fully supported by most of the residents of the city. As time went on in 2021, they moved the closure over to the Colonel By side because there was construction work happening, which would necessitate the closure as well. And then in 2022, once again, they closed the canal, the QED 24/7 over the summer months. When we heard about that last year, we had some concerns just because we knew traffic volumes were coming up, and it was more concerns in terms of the impact to the community with the additional traffic, because on a regular day, there was about 10,000 vehicles that traveled along that section of road near Fifth Avenue. So what we decided to do was to do some data collection in terms of trying to quantify what those impacts were. So maybe we'll go to the next slide. And so what we identified 6 intersections, both at the south end and the north end of the Pretoria Bridge. Now the closure went all the way up to from Fifth Avenue to Somerset. We weren't as concerned from a traffic perspective north of Pretoria Bridge because Elgin Street's right there where the closure is. So people would just take that road and continue north on Elgin versus going through the community. Now we know there are some that did that, but from our perspective, it would have been very minor because most people that were using the QED end up going north of Laurier, which Elgin brings you right there. The challenge was south of that, the exit point right at the closure, if you're heading towards downtown, would have been right at Fifth Avenue. So we wanted to collect data at that intersection, O'Connor and Fifth, where we would see a majority of the traffic going, to understand what folks were doing. So maybe we'll go to the next slide. And so what we saw in 2022 was a 56% increase of traffic at O'Connor and Fifth Avenue. Now, O'Connor is a residential street where we'd expect the maximum 1,000 vehicles traveling on that road. at sort of acceptable levels. So as you can see that there was over 1,000 additional vehicles that were on that section of road when the road was closed. Similarly, we saw more traffic at Bank and Fifth, Bank and Isabella. We did see a reduction over the 8-hour period at Pretoria Bridge and at Fifth Avenue, and that was over the the regular 10,000 vehicles we would have normally seen, which is unexpected. People do take alternate routes when roads are closed, and we see that through construction. And 25% doesn't seem like anything abnormal. But again, there still were a lot of people that continue down that, and that was the challenge. Next slide. So in terms of what we heard from residents back in 2022, there was concerns over delays to emergency response. We did talk to the fire services back last July, and they'd indicated there is a fire station right at 5th and O'Connor, services the area. They were seeing 30% delays in terms of getting to response times. So that was a concern. We also saw on O'Connor and other streets increased driver speeds, unsafe driving maneuvers. There's a multitude of multi-way stops along O'Connor Street where we've seen people not stopping or slowing down, not coming to a complete stop. This was probably because of some driver frustration because of the congestion and additional traffic in the area. We also saw increase in tour buses. Tour buses normally go through along the QED as they get towards the core. So those buses, I know there were some that used Lakeside, others went down to Fifth, and then they're traveling through these roads that were really meant to be used by buses. And then there was also the noise pollution and just pollution in general that was a concern to the residents. So next slide. So when we heard this year that the closure was going to reoccur, now there was a change in terms of timing. Instead of the 24/7 like we saw in 2022, it went from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So we wanted to collect more data. So we collected the intersections, but we also collected some data along the QED at Patterson Creek. And this was done over a week's period at the end of July. And what we saw on average, this is the numbers on the table here are hourly averages between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. It sort of fluctuated by time of day. We saw a bit more in the peaks, a bit less in the off peak, but we saw between 1 and 2 cyclists a minute traveling along that corridor, along QED. And it was about 2/3 on the roadway, 1/3 on the pathway. And similarly, the pedestrians were sort of reversed. There were some that were on the QED and others that were the majority were using the pathway. And as we also see is on the weekends, the volumes did go up, which is sort of what we've seen in the past. Historically, the NCC have had their bike days, and we see a lot of people on weekends traveling on those corridors, which isn't any challenge. And frankly, we haven't heard any complaints from residents on those weekends when those things happen. I think it's just because of the weekday volumes that we're seeing on those roads. Next slide. So we also took a look at the traffic volume impacts. Again, this is a very high level assessment because we haven't done the analysis, but we just sort of we took traffic counts on the same day, the same month, or similar days. We were going to do it on the 14th of July this year. Unfortunately, that was the weekend of the heavy lift, so we thought it wouldn't be appropriate to do it that day. So we did it the weekend after, just to try to ensure that we were sort of comparing apples and apples. Because if we'd done the count a little earlier or later, it might have just been a little different because of the fluctuations in traffic. So we're trying to get around the same time. And what we saw at O'Connor and QED and Fifth, we saw an increase in traffic volumes, especially as you got closer to the end of the peak. We did see a reduction between the 7 to 8 p.m. and then we saw a dramatic reduction once the QED was reopened. And similarly on O'Connor Street, just north of Fifth Avenue, we did see an increase, and you can see that between 13 and 16% increase between the 5 and 7 p.m. time frame. Next slide. And so this graph just represents in 2022 is the blue line. And as I mentioned, that the QED was closed 24/7. So we saw a higher number of volumes throughout the day. It was declining as you get through to later in the evening. The orange line that's shown there is the 2023 data, and you see a big drop at the 8 o'clock time frame, and that's when the QED reopened. Again, it's about a 60 to 65% reduction when the QED is open, and we would have expected to see that had the QED remained open for the entire time. So, next slide. So in terms of next steps, we are continuing to talk and work with the NCC on these closures. In terms of, we are collecting data. I know the NCC is collecting data, and we're going to share that data. The plan is to do another analysis of the traffic volume, and again, it's very specific to the traffic. It's not talking about all the other things that would go into that decision. We just want to see what the impacts are of on traffic to the community, and so we'll do another review this winter to see what those impacts are. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Phil, for that. I appreciate that and all the hard work that has been done on this. We'll go to delegations first. I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions to staff after as well. So our first delegate is Neil Severmutu. And I believe there's a slide presentation, and Neil, you're no stranger to this place.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Listen, I'd like to make 3 points and then end with a question. The first point is, so I live in the neighborhood that Phil's been talking about. I live just off O'Connor Street. And the traffic impact that I've seen, and I'll tell you, I'm out there every day, 3 times a day walking my dog. So, you know, at the start of the program in July, there's no doubt there was a lot of extra cars in the neighborhood. You know, there's a picture on the left that one of my neighbors took. You can see it's just wall-to-wall cars. However, go forward to August, and all of that has evaporated. And, you know, this is exactly what we expect with any detour, right? You know, cars take a few weeks to get used to it, and they're wandering through the local neighborhood. But once they're used to it, they're used to it, and the problem's solved. So that's the impact that I've seen. And I don't believe that the traffic impact on the neighborhood has been particularly significant at all. Next slide, please. So the second point is that the big takeaway that I have from the city data is that active use on the Queen Elizabeth driveway is way over capacity. So I looked at tables 1 and 2 of the documents that were included in that package, and there's about 3,500 daily cyclist pedestrians going through the QED corridor. Now, 3,500, what the standards are for a multi-use pathway is that the daily capacity of a 3-meter wide multi-use pathway is about 1,500. So 1,500 users a day, those pathways can comfortably manage. Anything more than that, you start getting into conflicts. And I think anyone that's used those pathways knows about those conflicts. I mean, you ride your bike for 100 meters and you have to go on the grass to get around someone, et cetera, et cetera. So those pathways are more than double the capacity that we have. And so that's, you know, I not that I'm speaking on behalf of the NCC, but that would make sense for why the NCC feels they need to make the roadway available to active users too. Next slide, please. So the third point I wanted to make is, like, what should this really be about? Like, we're defining this as a closed road, and what is the cost of a closed road? Like, is it worth the cost? That's really the way this whole debate has been defined. But when we think about Queen Elizabeth Driveway, it's probably some of the most precious and valuable real estate in the entire city. So if we had a blank slate, what would we do with it? Would we create a freeway going through there? I don't think so. We would say, what is the best use that we can make of this land for the benefit of the people and for some of the objectives we have, whether it's tourism, whether it's economic development. And so what I've thrown up is just a graphic that was put on social media this summer by a local architect who said, why don't we turn Queen Elizabeth Driveway from the start to the end, why don't we turn it into an urban park? And this is a fantastic idea. And that, you know, that architect had all sorts of ideas about what could be along there and how we could attract tourists and interest. So I would even take it a step further and say, you know, the idea of a urban park is a great one. I would love to see Queen Elizabeth Driveway turned into that. But why don't we even try to make this into a national urban park? So some of you are probably aware that this government and Parks Canada are trying to create 15 urban national parks across the country, recognizing that not everyone can get out to the national parks that are, you know, remote. So we need to bring those national parks to the people. And so and the people are in the cities. So, what I would love to see is the city of Ottawa encouraging the NCC to negotiate with Parks Canada over making this into a national urban park. I mean, Parks Canada would probably throw $20–30 million to turn this into an amazing space, okay? This could become the top tourist destination, maybe in the province. And this is the opportunity we have, and yet we just want to talk about what is the cost to commuters of closing this road. And so I just think we need to think bigger. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to end with a question, and this is actually for those who couldn't be here today, and whoever is controlling this presentation, this is a video, so if you can just click on it to start the video. Over the weekend, there were hundreds of kids that showed up to cycle on Queen Elizabeth Driveway. Beautiful sight to see. We have a little video, hopefully we'll get it playing. But my question is, what do you say to these kids, right? Are you saying that their absolute enjoyment of this space is less important than the priority of cars and commuters, who, by the way, have many other options of getting downtown? The crazy thing is, you do a Google search on how to get from, whether it's Finley Creek, whether Barrhaven, wherever, how to get to City Hall. Google Maps does not even provide QED as the preferred route to get here. So we've got we've got 6,000 kilometers of roadway, and we're arguing over.
Great. Thank you very much, Neil, for your delegation. I'm looking, we have a question from Councillor Troster.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for being here. I share your vision for what the Queen Elizabeth Driveway could be. And I'll just say that my own child learned to ride her bike on the QED during the pandemic when all the parks were closed and there was no other place for us to roam downtown. I will say, though, the response from the community has been split. And I've heard mostly from seniors who live along the QED who are concerned about their own mobility if they can't ride a bike. And this can be a challenge with pedestrianization. So I'm just interested in if the QED were turned into a linear park, what options you think could be available for seniors, and also how you think we can mitigate some of those traffic impacts on residents. Yeah.
Well, listen, if I can start with that second question about the traffic impact on residents. As we saw with the closure this summer, cars will find alternative routes, okay? And so again, there'll be an adjustment period, but people will find a way. In terms of seniors, and I think we're going to hear more about this later. Again, I come back to the point that there are many alternatives to travel around the city by car. Okay, and if a senior, for instance, feels that they absolutely have to travel along the Rideau Canal, well, they can cross the other side of the canal and go along Colonel By Driveway. Like, why do we need both sides of the canal prioritized for cars? Like, why can't we put people first? Part of that.
Okay, my second question is, I know the mayor and I disagree on this, but he has said that if there were to be sort of a more permanent closure, he would prefer the other side of the canal as opposed to the QED. Is that something that would satisfy you? Do you think that that makes sense? What are the pros and cons of one side of the canal being close to cars versus the other?
Right. Well, I mean, if we look at volumes, if we look at traffic volumes, and Phil probably knows this better than I do, but Colonel By is a much more heavily used car traffic road than Queen Elizabeth Driveway is. So that's one consideration to take into concern. But if we're talking about traffic on Queen Elizabeth Driveway, I mean, I think we need to put the issue on the table of Lansdowne. I mean, this is the issue that we don't seem to want to talk about publicly. But a lot of what we're really talking about is how do we solve the problem of getting cars to Lansdowne? Now, the interesting thing is there are other options for how we can get cars into Lansdowne that don't involve just turning Queen Elizabeth Driveway into a freeway. For instance, if you look at Queen Elizabeth Driveway, if you look between Bronson and Bank, it's essentially two roads, right? There's a north side and a south side. Why don't we we could turn the north side of that into a two-lane vehicle access that gets cars from Bronson down to Bank Street. And then at Bank Street, where we've got the Bank Street Bridge, there's a service road on Lansdowne between the stadium and the trees and the canal. So there's an existing service road. So why don't we take that part of Queen Elizabeth driveway along with the service road, and that could get cars to the south, the east parking lot of Lansdowne. So what I'm trying to say is that the issue of traffic on QED is primarily about Lansdowne as far as I can see, and we can solve that many other ways. And I'd be more than happy to talk about that or provide. In fact, I'd love it if the city were coming up with options for how we can solve the Lansdowne traffic problem through ways other than trying to, force the NCC into transforming this road into something that it's not designed to be.
Thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Councillor Devine.
Didn't want to get in the way. Hey, Neil, thank you for coming out and presenting. I just wanted to, I very much appreciate the perspective you're bringing to this, not just as a resident, but as someone who is trying to steer the conversation in a direction to make sure that all avenues are considered. And I'm not going to delve into it here and now, but I definitely want to have more conversations about this. But what I appreciate that you're bringing is the long-term vision, the long-term cost benefit analysis of, as we continue to grow the kind of city that we need to grow to sustain our growth, how do we make the best use of our assets, of our transportation assets and of our public assets? So thank you very much for bringing that conversation to it. I appreciate that you said, I think we got to think big. I remember one of my biggest mentors said, Sean, don't think big, think huge. And I like to entertain that idea. And also, thank you very much for continuing to organize and promote your critical mass rides. I was very happy to participate in that, to attend that critical mass one the other day. That showed a lot of direction of what I think a lot of residents are looking to support in the city. And I look forward to participating in your October 14th event.
Great. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. And in fact, I'd like to extend that invitation to all councillors. There will be a group bike ride on October the 14th, leaving from the Canadian War Museum at 10 a.m. It's a huge amount of fun. Everyone's welcome. There's hundreds of people show up, including a huge number of kids. So if you like fun, come and join us, please. It's a very welcoming environment. And Sean, I appreciate that comment about thinking, not just thinking big, but thinking huge.
Yep.
And again, I want to come back to the point of tourism. And let's say we want to drive tourism in this city. We can learn from the example of like San Antonio in Texas. So San Antonio has a river that goes through it. They made the conscious choice that they were going to create the San Antonio River Walk, where they said this is going to be a car-free zone. It's going to be active users exclusively. This has become the #1 tourist attraction in Texas. Okay, #1. We could do the same here in Ottawa. We could drive millions of dollars into this economy by thinking big, thinking huge on Queen Elizabeth Driveway. And I just want to reiterate that if the problem we're trying to solve is getting cars into Lansdowne, there are alternative ways that we can do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important that we keep our eye on the big picture because there are massive opportunities that can be seized. And I don't want to focus too much just on how do we solve a technical problem at the risk of avoiding a massive opportunity. And I encourage you or Brandon Lind, that architect, to continue bringing those ideas to partners, maybe even to the NCC, to see what they think about that. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Good. Seeing no further questions, we'll move on to Derek Simpson. Thank you for your delegation today.
All right, thank you. Just confirming I can be seen and heard.
Absolutely. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Perfect. When the Centertown Community Association's Transportation Committee met last month to discuss Queen Elizabeth Drive, we agreed unanimously that active transportation and a better vision for the parkway should be prioritized. In short, we want Queen Elizabeth Drive to look more like a park. But when putting together my talk for today, there were simply too many ideas from residents to fit into just 5 minutes. So I went about trying to find the #1 reason to invest in Queen Elizabeth Drive. It's not traffic, even though allowing cars on the parkway induces demand and makes traffic worse downtown long-term. It's not sustainability, even though to meet our city's climate change goals, we will have to encourage more active transportation. And it's not even about safety. even though Queen Elizabeth Drive is one of the only places downtown a child can safely learn to ride a bike or ride side by side with their family. I know what you're thinking. Of course, this young downtown guy is pushing for less cars in his neighborhood. But the number one reason to invest in and prioritize active transportation on Queen Elizabeth Drive is something I'm sure we can all agree on. The need to invest and see returns in our most valuable places. The Rideau Canal is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of just 22 in all of Canada. Using a world-class destination for two slow and winding roads is not a smart use for such a valuable and meaningful destination. Reimagining Queen Elizabeth Drive would be good for businesses and the local economy, creating a destination with shops selling food and drinks, outdoor space for performances and festivals, and plenty of tourists. What we are suggesting is not a progressive pipe dream. Cities across Canada are investing in their waterfronts. Let me repeat that a little differently. Building desirable people-first places around waterfronts is the status quo. Montreal, Vancouver, and Halifax have all transformed their cities by prioritizing people at their waterfronts, making their cities more livable, and helping the local economy. I ask you today, on behalf of the Centertown Community Association, encourage and invest in our city's most productive places. And on Queen Elizabeth Drive, allow the NCC to enact its vision for our nation's capital. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your delegation. There's questions. Councillor Troster.
Hi, Derek. Thanks for being here. And thank you to the Centertown Community Association's Transportation Committee. My question for you is, so Neil brought up the issue of Lansdowne, which I know is kind of the silent sort of factor in a lot of these studies. Given that Lansdowne is a destination and that Bank Street runs through Centertown, so does that traffic, has your transportation committee at the CCA put some thought into what we might be able to do on Bank Street to improve traffic mobility to events at Lansdowne?
Yeah, so we very much have. Great question. We were active in OC Transpo's route review. The 6 is the biggest complaint we hear about. It runs down Bank Street. It is one of the most canceled and most late buses in the city. And when it does show up, it's always full. We think short term, fixing the buses on Bank, as in making them more frequent, and looking at bus lanes, and even long term, looking at things like trams or light rail. But we understand that for now, we need quick solutions that can help.
That's great. And I'm also just wondering if you could, so we've heard about some of the traffic impacts on the glebe of the closure of the QED. I'm wondering if there have been noticeable impacts for Centertown residents that you have heard of. Because I know you're taking the position that you support the pedestrianization of that area, but I'm just wondering if you've heard any contradictory opinions.
So we've heard a couple, which is understandable and is not surprising. But long-term, people take the position, especially with how much density is happening here, how many high-rises, that if everyone here is forced to drive or doesn't have the choice to take other ways, that traffic is going to be a nightmare.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I'll just remind the committee that 40% of the residents in Somerset Ward do not own a car. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. We have a question from Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Derek, and also thank you to Neil, the previous delegation, for coming out today. I appreciate it, and being as you're living there. So this doesn't appear to be about people who are living in the area. It appears to be about people who want to come, but they want to come by car. That seems to be, and not just as on their bikes, unfortunately. So I can understand the tension, but I appreciate that to make the argument that this is hurting the local residents is clearly not the case from what I'm hearing from you and from Neil before you. So I appreciate your delegation because I think it's very important. And the fact that active transportation needs to be encouraged, and we need to work with our partner, the NCC, on creating more public spaces with us, and hopefully, that work for everyone. But I don't know but I was, Ariel asked about the fact that there's no, is there any dissension in the Centertown Community Association on this? And it doesn't sound like there's very much. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we have heard, I think 2 or 3 voices, mainly from seniors who live in the Golden Triangle, who, do like driving and they have a right to drive as they should. But one of our big complaints we hear is there's a huge lack of green space downtown. There's all these big buildings going up, which is good. We need density, we need affordability. But if these people don't have backyards, they need places to go. And Queen Elizabeth Drive is a great opportunity for that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Derek, for your presentation. There was something you said near the end, and I'll paraphrase it. Essentially was your advice to us here was the city needs to let the NCC do this. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think that was the spirit of it. And it's
close enough.
We are kind of in a weird position here where it's not up to us letting the NCC do it. It's their property. They can do it. They can do whatever they want. That's kind of the problem. Is I'm not convinced they've gone out and done the consultation they should be doing. We're having a hearing here where we're airing out some of the issues. We have 3 speakers. There's many more people who I'm sure want to weigh in. Has the NCC reached out specifically to the Centertown Citizens Community Association and asked you specifically for your feedback? What kind of engagement have they had with your group?
Yeah, so we met with them about a month ago, just on the plans for the city in general, and we will be meeting with them in the future, I expect, specifically on Queen Elizabeth Drive. So we believe they've done a reasonable job of consultation.
And what would you like to see? What would an ideal decision-making process, what kind of consultation from the NCC should it involve?
Yeah. So I think definitely talking with community associations, but also talking to residents in general. And I would really like to see as well smaller workshops held. So, get a group of 10 people at a table with an NCC staffer and just hear ideas, hear what's going to happen, because it's too early in the process for us to say exactly what should happen there. We just believe that there's better things possible.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Gower, and thank you for your delegation today. We'll move on to our final delegate, which is Paul O'Leary.
Delegate, I do not bring a light and laser show. I bring a piece of paper. Light and laser blind me. So, I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. Sounds like a Mado meeting. Turn the damn thing on. Okay. I live over here. I drive a car when I can, or use taxis. When the roadway was opened here very recently, I had an appointment, as I do quite often, up at the Civic Hospital region. So I jumped in my car and I drove down here, and there was moderate traffic. This was in the morning. So it was moderate traffic, much of it coming into town. Don't ask me to define moderate. Coming back later in the morning, there was a great deal of traffic still coming up into town. So this is a roadway. It is 2 cars or trucks wide. It's got a yellow line right down the center, and it's a road. I've got a couple of points, if I may. I've just said it's a QED. It's a roadway. There is the parallel one that for bicycles and slower moving bicycles, pedestrians, people in wheelchairs. No, that's fine. Commuters need this road. If anybody thinks they don't, stand out here at 7 in the morning, stand still and watch till 8 or 9. These are people coming in from the suburbs, nice people that coming in to work. They can't afford to live downtown. They come in town, they work, at the end of the day, they go home. And sightseers like to use it. And in that, I will mention tourists. We advertise in this city, and we do it bloody well, sorry, old soldier, we do it bloody well. And part of our advertisement and everything I've seen is the canal. Isn't it grand? And it is bloody grand. It's lovely to drive or to walk or to bicycle and see it and smell the flowers. And then we tell visitors coming in, sorry, all summer this road's closed, can't go there. I brought a friend of mine up from Virginia Beach last summer, and I was a good tour guide. I mean, that may be my third career, and loved it. But we couldn't drive down the Parkway or Queen Elizabeth Driveway. So what I did, we took the boat trip down the side, and I noticed two things. She loved it. I also noticed during the summer that day, very, very light traffic on the Queen Elizabeth Drive, the closed Queen Elizabeth Drive, very light. The real high-speed bikes, shiny hats, shiny shirts, tight shorts, we're out in the middle, going like hell, being active. How active can you get in a multi-speed bicycle on 2.4 kilometers of road? That's not active. If I have enough time at the end, I'll tell you what active is from a soldier's point of view. Now, we have 3 points of view here. The mayor, who I understand was democratically elected, if you can imagine. The people of Ottawa trust him and generally like him. And he doesn't like the closure of Queen Elizabeth Driveway, and I'm on his side. We have special interest groups, bicycle enthusiasts. I see here the first delegate, very keen, dead keen. And then we have the NCC, and I don't know what motivates them. I really do not. Beyond, rather, use an overused word, a woke approach to life. Life ain't this way. Who gains by the closure of this road? Bicycle enthusiasts, and to a lesser degree, and I know by watching, I am up to the walking several miles down this road. People who, with their families, people on wheelchairs, and the special interest bikey people. Who loses? The rest of us. The handicapped people. Now, I'm not bloody handicapped, but I can't get from here to the up to the hospital area on my feet or on a bicycle. I fall over. Not because I'm drunk, that happens at night, but because I need to get there safely. The actual usage of the roadway, I found the introduction when we showed the numbers to be laughable, absolutely laughable, and all in line with what the mayor has said to us repeatedly. This is for a tiny handful of people at the cost of the entire city, our visitors, tourists. I'm sorry, that's too big a price to pay. The walkways are there. The agenda here clearly has been, we, a very tiny group, want to dominate this.
Mr. O'Leary, thank you very much for your delegation.
Done and done.
If I'll give you 15 seconds to wrap up, and then we'll
Okay.
We have some questions
No,
from
I
some
understand.
councillors.
And I hope there's a lot of questions. Anyway, no, I don't. Doesn't matter. I would figure up with one word to represent what I see here. Dog in the manger. If you remember back to a time when we talked about the fox that cut off his tail, and because everybody else did, and other such stories, the dog in the manger is the dog that sat in a manger that he didn't need, but he didn't want anyone else to need. Finish, sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Leary. O'Leary, is that a good Irish name, I assume?
It is, low, rude, and Irish, more fit to hod than the epaulet.
Wonderful. Tierney O'Leary. Councillor Troster.
Hi, Mr. O'Leary. I'm Ariel Troster. If you live nearby, then I'm your counselor. So I just wanted to say hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. And even though we have some disagreements on this, I very much enjoyed your presentation. And I think it did represent what I have heard from some seniors who live in the area. So I do appreciate that. I'm just wondering if you have had the chance to try to navigate the the mixed use pathway along the canal during one of our festivals, like the Tulip Fest? Have you?
Sorry.
So have you had a chance to either walk or cycle along the pedestrian pathway? So when the road is open to cars during Tulip Fest or one of the big festivals nearby?
I have.
You have? And what
Yes.
did you find?
It was busy,
It was very busy.
but I did notice, if I will, people enjoying it because it was open at that time, who could not otherwise use it to go down and see the tulips
You mean in their cars?
in a car.
Okay.
Who could see the tulips that came to us as a gift, largely because the Queen of Holland was born here,
Yes.
and because the Canadian Army, of which I'm a proud veteran, saved it in World War II.
Right.
I want to see those things. I want to smell them. I want to find a side street and pull my car in and walk around and do those things.
So in Montreal, where they closed the Mount Royal Drive, which is also an iconic street in Montreal for the summer, what they've provided to help people with mobility issues is free electric scooter cab rides for seniors who can park off-site, and then they can be taken into the site and offered a tour. Is that something that would interest you?
I think that is very interesting.
Okay.
So myself and my friend from Virginia could have come up here, got on one of those cars, and she would have loved it. And I got to retard to keep old girlfriends.
Okay.
So
So I'm hearing loud and clear from seniors that when we do pedestrianize the street, we do need mobility options for
Yes.
people who can't walk the whole length.
Mhm.
My own mother has had back surgery,
Right.
finds it very hard to walk. So anyway, I very much appreciate the feedback. I know the mayor was democratically elected, but so were all the members of this committee.
Oh, yeah.
And we definitely hear a lot of varying opinions from residents. But I will tell you, I was very impressed in Montreal with how they've managed to pedestrianize their waterfront, but also have options to get people in there to enjoy it who can't necessarily walk or ride a bicycle. So I
Great.
think that's something that would be very interesting to explore with the NCC.
Great. Thank you very much for your delegation today, Mr. O'Leary. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
At this point, we're going to turn the floor back to committee members and questions to staff. So at this point, if you have questions to staff, please raise your hands. Councillor Troster.
Hello. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much to city staff. As you can imagine, I hear a lot about the QED in my ward. And I think the delegations we heard today are very representative of the diversity of opinion that I've been hearing about. I just have some questions about the methodology used to conduct the data. There's a note in the report that the focus was initially on the impact to events at Lansdowne. And quite apart from anything going on at Lansdowne, they're definitely the highest volume times. And they're usually times, you know, even if there were cars on the QED, that we would have a reasonable expectation of delay. So did you also account for rush hour in this data?
Yeah, the data was collected from in the morning rush hour, the off-peak period, and the PM peak, similar to what we do most of the time, or all the time in terms of traffic. We also looked at sort of the evening until 8 o'clock. We sort of wanted to mirror sort of the when the closure was to see it. So we do see variations in the data in terms of the peak periods, like we would see. So there's more traffic, you know, in the morning and in the afternoon from that perspective.
Okay, so this summer there are 103 road construction projects in Somerset Ward, which is a lot of construction detours. So I'm wondering if that was somehow represented in the data, because often when I hear about from residents about the impact of, you know, one particular pedestrian closure, they're also being impacted by all those other construction projects that are going on. So I'm just wondering if that's reflected in this data.
Yeah, I mean, the construction in your ward, again, is again north of the Queensway. We focus mainly south of the Queensway, so I don't think the impact would be that great. But you're right in terms of when we close roads for constructions, and then we hear that as well from, you know, residents. We're hearing it now in terms of with the Chamberlain closure and the impact to the streets south of the Queensway, because that's where people are going or want to get to the east. But anyway, so I at the end of the day, I think because of the construction in your ward, it wouldn't have had that big of an impact. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we weren't too concerned from a traffic perspective. Again, this is, you know, the studies that we're doing is all tied to the traffic, and so we didn't believe and didn't hear from residents in terms of in your ward, that the closure of the QED north of Pretoria Bridge was having a big impact. And as I mentioned, Elgin Street's right there, so it's an easy way to go. The challenge south is that, a vehicle and a lot of tourists too, because, we heard from that perspective too. And, they have the GPS units, but, if you don't know the town, you sort of start going on these streets and it can become a little problematic. The challenge is where the closure occurred is right at 5th and O'Connor QED. And it's 5th isn't an arterial road. If there'd been an arterial road, then maybe it's a bit more manageable and we'll have the traffic. And that's why when we met with and talked with the NCC, we suggested, let's consider maybe Colonel By, because, and you could go all the way down to Bronson to Pretoria Bridge. So it's a lot longer. Because again, where the cutoff point is to close the road is on an arterial. So our expectation is most would stay on that road. There'd be more congestion on those roads, but it wouldn't be on the community. And there's also fewer access points to get into the community off of Colonel By.
Yeah, and I will also argue there are so few safe north-south cycling options. And now also with the bridge construction happening on Percy and the detours that are happening, it has been very tough on pedestrians and cyclists. And, the Percy underpass is the safest north-south bike link between Centertown and Glebe. That's closed right now. So I know that a lot of my neighbors are using the QED more. So I know this is a tough piece to tease out, but I will say the QED is a really essential active transportation link between the ward that I represent and the rest of the city, where we have very few options. I'm terrified. I will never put my bike on Bronson. Bank Street is terrifying. And there's, it's just very tough. And so I understand that we have sort of a collision of interest here. But as I said, 40% of my residents in my ward don't own a car. And so it has been delightful for me. And I'm hearing that from a lot of young families, some of whom chose to buy a bike rack for their car to drive to the canal to be able to cycle safely with their children because they don't feel that there are safer options in the neighborhood. And that speaks to where we need to really step up our cycling infrastructure as a city. I guess what concerns me is that we're talking about convenience versus safety to some degree, that it might take longer when you're in a car, but that's compromising the safety of cyclists. And as I was mentioning in my questions to the last delegate, I mean, the commuter paths, the existing paths along a canal are pretty much immovable when you're on a bike on the weekends with traffic volumes. I can speak less to during the week, but I will say, just as Neil pointed out, that the traffic volume that we're seeing of cyclists when the road is closed to cars would be unmanageable on the existing pathways. So I just want to say that this is a complicated issue and it has been a net benefit to people who get around the city without cars. And I also just wanted to comment that the MTO is currently proposing a 92-week hard closure of the QED for a bridge replacement, a closure that I'm not convinced needs to be either that long or that hard a closure. And I hope we see the same kind of energy in expressing frustration about that, because we have very little, again, it's another entity we have very little control over. Do you think that it would be possible to improve the traffic impacts of this closure? Like, have there been discussions with the NCC about other ways to reroute traffic, other creative ideas that might be able to maintain this pedestrianization while also lessening the impact of traffic in our neighborhoods?
Yeah, I mean, we did meet with them a few months ago and talked about that specifically because of the concerns we were hearing this year. Again, the challenge we could put variable message signs, sort of south of Preston to say it's closed. But again, it's not, I mean, people might detour, but others may not. I think also the focus into your, previous comment, on the weekend, and it's been, forever that the QED has been closed and the time's gone by and we have no concerns and we don't hear concerns on the weekend. I mean, the marathon closes it on both sides. And again, so I think the challenge is really, it's during the week when you've got in the rush hour, the peak periods where you've got that volume of traffic that's trying to get in, like I heard earlier, there's very limited roads to get. I think there's 7 arterial roads to get downtown and they're all at capacity. So by taking this one away, you're just moving the challenges to the other roads, but you're also, because of where it was happening, you're basically forcing traffic to go down on a street that was never designed for that. And I think that's our biggest concern from that perspective. But I think for weekends, again, and the data even showed that in terms of, we saw an increased number of cyclists and pedestrians, and we fully support that in terms of, from a traffic perspective. There's no issues from that perspective. We don't hear the complaints. The volumes aren't as high because it's the weekend and people aren't trying to get from point A to point B like they would do it during the week.
Yeah, and I think this points to a fundamental challenge for those of us who live in Centertown, because we live here and we want mobility in our neighborhood. We want safety for our families. And as Derek from the CCA mentioned, so few people who live in the neighborhood have backyards, have green space at all, have room to roam. And the densification that's happening, I mean, the reason I have a huge balance in my cash in lieu of parkland fund is because we're building towers with no parkland, with no green nearby. So I just want to say, I know that this is a tricky issue, but for the residents who live downtown, it's been enormously valuable to have it pedestrianized. And again, with 103 construction projects happening in the neighborhood, I do think that also impacted the traffic in the neighborhood, and the fact that GPS will tell people to zoom down a different street when a bridge is closed. I noticed on my own street. So I just want to say it's complex. This data is complex. The opinions in the neighborhood are varied. But I really would encourage the city to work with the NCC to try to improve the traffic impacts rather than trying to shut down this seasonal closure, because I do think we can do things to accommodate seniors. We can do things to accommodate traffic in our neighborhoods. And the value of this kind of open green space can't be underestimated for a neighborhood where so few people have a place to go outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Next committee member, Councillor Devine.
I am not Councillor Plant. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that we're having this conversation. And I very much appreciate that this is a conversation that has a lot of tension to it. And I think we are just in the early phases of a conversation that's going to span many, many years as we work towards solutions that are in the ultimate long-term benefit of a city that is undergoing a lot of change. And I'm only 1 year into the job, but I am easily recognizing that change of any nature brings complaints and brings tension and friction. And sometimes that complaint and friction and tension is because a fundamental flaw is being identified and someone's saying, this is wrong, what you just tried here, the change. It's factually wrong and we have to fix that. And sometimes the complaint and the friction is just, it's the natural human outcome and reaction to change. And sometimes we get past that. The questions I wanna ask to staff. So with the data that was reviewed, with all of with what was studied over the course of this change that the NCC imposed on the closure, do we have any reporting on an increase in collisions as a result of this traffic diversion?
At this point, it's too early to say because it can take time to get the collision data. I know for 2023, we're still getting collisions from earlier, like June or July, because it can take up to 3-4 months.
Yep.
And similarly, when we were doing the analysis last year, it was only 2-3 months after it happened. So it's something that we're going to want to look at for this review that we're going to do this winter, to look at last year and see if we've got data for this year. It usually takes time. And also with collisions, we want to sort of see trends. Because collisions are very random. So you could have, no collisions somewhere for 5 years and all of a sudden there's 3 collisions and then there's nothing for 5 years. So we just, we'll get into that. It was just last year when we did our analysis, it was too soon to get a good understanding of from that perspective. We didn't hear, or I didn't get any complaints in terms of collisions occurring, but I think the challenge is the risk of a collision occurring is higher now when that traffic is on those local streets, because you've got 2 schools. Now, I'll say the schools were closed when these occur, but there are, there are areas for the kids to play. So they are traveling. That was one of the concerns that some residents had, is just with the additional. So you're just increasing that risk, which then increases the likelihood that a collision might occur.
Yeah. Yes, because I'm just trying to measure the difference between problems that are based purely on frustration and problems that are based on an actual hazard.
Mhm.
Because you also were mentioning that there's questions about stop compliance. And in my neighborhood, where there's no QED, NCC imposition of anything, it's just a regular old neighborhood, I hear lots of issues about stop compliance. And so I don't know if the stop compliance you're referring to is based on this change or is just based on bad drivers in general, because you don't have stop, like when you were talking about the changes we've seen here, which may include an increase in stop compliance, it's not that you have data measuring pre this change to compare stop compliance levels, do you?
No, but I think what I was saying is we know that there's 1,100 cars, as example, more. There are additional 1,100 cars on O'Connor Street.
Yeah.
So like you say, you know, stop compliance is just not one issue in one area of the city. It's unfortunately everywhere in the city. But what you're doing is you're increasing that number. Whereas previously they would have been on QED. They would not have, like this morning, the roads open, the majority, if not everybody, would have stayed on QED. You're moving that traffic onto O'Connor Street. So we know that there's already a problem citywide in terms of stop compliance. So now you're adding an increased volume, which then increases your risk for a collision to occur, or to that occurs. So again, we didn't measure how many cars did stop versus before, because, you know, based on sort of understanding of what we see, it would be very low, which is what studies show across the city. But you're just increasing the number of people doing it, which then increases that risk.
Increases the potential. And then my last question, Chair, is for Chief Hutt on the nature of how these changes lead to our emergency response time. Because I can definitely understand that you're looking at different scenarios of emergency response time with regards to access to the QED. So I suppose my first question, Chief Hutt, were there incidents of emergency response during the span where you could not access the QED and respond to an emergency as you could have prior to the change? Were there actual incidents of delayed response?
Chair, through you, Councillor, thank you for your question. I really appreciate today's discussion, and my lens is from a emergency services first response perspective. It was only last Thursday that I presented in front of emergency preparedness and protective services about, you know, response times, and there was a lot of discussion about, you know, effective response force. How are we meeting our thresholds with getting apparatus on scene within a specific time? Although we're meeting our thresholds, as I reported, what we've noticed in this area. And you're probably well aware that we do have a fire station, Station 12, located right at the corner of the Queen Elizabeth driveway, right at 5th Avenue. It's on O'Connor. And what we have noticed when we ran the data from July of 2022, we reported 30% in experiencing delays in getting to those calls because of the closure. Queen Elizabeth driveway is a main thoroughway for, you know, north of the Queensway, crossing onto the other side of the canal. So for that station alone, we were experiencing a number of delays, either through rerouting, which we do all the time. We have to reroute construction. There's a whole bunch of other variances that we have to deal with. But then also there were situations where if we were having to get out, remove barricades, and then have a truck access it. And I think it goes without saying, you know, any delay, you know, it's very difficult for us to endorse if it's going to delay fire apparatus arriving on location from a life and a property perspective.
Good. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief.
Great questions, Councillor. I'll go to our next committee member, Councillor DeRoche.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Chair, for initiating this conversation today with your inquiry. You know, it is you know, it's a difficult conversation for sure, as we've seen from the delegations. And my take is that, you know, sort of the recreational benefits for some are coming because of the misery of others, and I think the data is showing that. And I find it really difficult to accept when the NCC starts to play municipal government, right? We're doing that today. We have to understand the impacts to the various businesses and the emergency services in the area. And we have that obligation to have consultations and to hear folks on both sides of the issues, which is not the experience when you deal with the National Capital Commission. So again, it troubles me when the NCC plays municipal level of government, and we're at the receiving end of it here today. But I think it's important to see the data. I think it's important to be transparent in terms of the impacts that we're having. I really do not want to gloss over the impact on emergency services, and I appreciate the input from the chief, the fire chief, and those are very concerning statistics in terms of the delays that you're experiencing. And if I've learned anything in my 9 years at City Hall, minutes matter, Chief, when you're responding to an emergency situation. So can you just comment on the magnitude of a delay? We're extremely thankful that there's not a case where there was a situation where a delay led to a tragedy, but those can and unfortunately will happen because minutes matter. Chief, can you comment on that?
Yeah, Chair, through you. Thank you for that question. I did indicate on our report last week. The fire service it's changing, and we're experiencing situations where fires are growing faster, and that's why it's so important when we do the data that we have to look at the modeling as to how soon can we get a truck on location to mitigate a situation. And with all the intensification of buildings and the infilling and the growth, there's certainly risk, and I certainly don't want to fear mongering anybody. The fire services, we do an excellent job, but delays, if we see delays in getting to scenes, and it may not even be a fire, could be simply a medical call, medical emergency, or any other kind of a rescue, but minutes do matter. And where we specifically see that is during fire growth right now. And it's a lot of the products that we're buying today, they burn hotter, they burn faster, and that's more of a reason for us to really focus on making sure we're getting to the scene as safely and as quickly as we can.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. And I certainly don't think you're fear mongering, and I will defend you if anyone accuses you of that. You've said minutes matter, and the previous chiefs have said minutes matter well before the situation that we're dealing with today. So this is not something that's new. There's been some dialogue and some points brought up on, we just need to come up with a better mitigation plan. And what would that look like for you for a mitigation plan? What, you just park a fire truck on the other side of the river? I mean, to me, we don't have the ability to build another fire station in another neighborhood, and I certainly expect that would not be welcomed by folks. You can't just park a fire truck somewhere else. How do you mitigate your situation?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. We often have very dynamic deployment models, and it's normally for very short-term solutions. But if this comes to fruition, we would certainly have to do some modeling of our response data, and we would have to look at it from a station location study to see if it does become a closure, then is that the appropriate location for that station moving forward to serve the residents that we need? So there would have to be significant modeling from a response, and we'd have to take that in as part of our station location study.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Chief, and thank you to staff for bringing this forward. I think it provides a voice to the people that are impacted by this closure. It is a difficult conversation, and I understand sort of some of the priorities for the downtown core to increase for the recreational capacity and green space. I don't believe this is the way to do it. I think if we took a similar approach, we certainly wouldn't be doing it in the way that the NCC has done this. So thank you to staff for pulling this together and really shedding some light on the impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeRoche. Next committee member, Vice Chair Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, interesting conversation today. I do think it's important to underline that from the city's perspective, the closure would be better placed on Colonel By. In my view, it's kind of a compromise. You know, we're talking about the same location, same, you know, it's still adjacent to the UNESCO World Heritage Site, but would have a less detrimental impact to our circulation and the concerns you're highlighting today. So, you know, in your discussions with the NCC, is there a willingness to consider Colonel By?
We did suggest to them to pilot Colonel By this year, and they said that wasn't feasible. They did mention that there was construction at Hawthorne and Pretoria Bridge this year, and that section of Colonel By between Clegg and Pretoria Bridge was closed this year anyway for a small section of road at the north end. But that's not something that they were going to consider, and I'm not sure in terms of the future. But as I mentioned earlier, you know, Colonel By doesn't have the number of access points and links into the community that does, and also where the closure would occur, where it would be near at Bronson, which is another arterial. So we would see similar to what we see at the north end of QED at Elgin, where people just stay on Elgin. We would just expect people to stay on Bronson, which is a road that's meant to carry the traffic, and versus taking roads into the community, which is what happens when it's closed at Fifth.
Yeah, well, I do know we have some representatives from the NCC in the gallery today, so I do hope that that is something that is discussed more fully when it comes to next year. Because I do think, you know, we've heard a diversity of perspectives. The councillors for the area have shared that as well. I don't know how well advertised it was that, you know, this was going to be an item for discussion. I'm sure, you know, we don't typically lift IPDs, so I'm sure we could have had tons of delegations, because I think, you know, even as a suburban councillor, we've heard about this issue, and there, as the councillors have shared, there is a diversity of perspectives, whether it be local residents or people that need to commute through there, or business owners. You know, I have a friend who has a small business in Old Ottawa South, and he has a small business in the Byward Market, and he has to move product between the two locations. So, you know, again, just a different perspective, making it very challenging with that closure. One of the delegates had two photos as part of his presentation where July looked very busy and then August not as much. I know that the official data was for July, but you know, I also know that you've been monitoring the area, and is that consistent? Was there a noticeable drop in August, or were both months, was there a lot of traffic?
Yeah, I think in general, you know, in the summer months, the volumes are very similar. We don't see like July, you know, 100 cars or vehicles, and then August it goes down to 50. We do see a reduction in July and August compared to September and June, because more people are on holidays. So again, I would expect that the volumes would have been very similar. And the feedback we got from the residents was, you know, that at least the ones that did contact us, they were still sending in concerns in August as well. So I think again, it just it's a good representation of the month and of the 2 months in that area. So
great, thank you. Those are my questions. I just also wanted to thank Chief Hutt for being here, because I had questions about emergency response, but my colleagues have asked them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I'll go to the next committee member. Don't worry, Sean Menard will get to you at some point. Going to committee member Gower.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Chair.
Chair.
Sorry, Chair. Just I think is this committee member Gower's second round? I'm the local councillor. We're talking about directly my area, so really appreciate the chance to get on the speaker's agenda at some point. I think this is the second round for committee members, so
Not for me.
No, it's not. No, so you'll have to hold your powder. Sorry.
maybe it was a question he asked to the delegation. Sorry about that, Chair.
Gower, please proceed.
Okay. I wanted to ask staff the discussions with the NCC, if you could give us some more details or context about what that is, and also if you know anything more about the NCC's consultation plans with stakeholders or the general public at this time.
I'm not aware of that. We haven't discussed that in detail in terms of consultation. They've notified in this past spring. They informed us they were looking at closing the road. We did provide them with the report that's been presented today with the recommendation to use Colonel By. And they wrote back saying, like I mentioned earlier, that they were going to proceed with the QED. We had conversations with them and meetings with them past there, and we've agreed to share the data, to work together to see what we can do to try to mitigate the challenges the residents are having. But like I previously mentioned, it's really difficult because where the closure is happening is right in, and it's basically putting people onto the local residential streets. So that's sort of, I would say, the extent of our conversations.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess I touched on it before. My concern is about the whole consultation. I mean, at city council, if we're closing a street temporarily, it needs a motion to council to do that. If we were going to do a long-term permanent closure, there would be, I assume, an extensive consultation process. It's not something we do often, but actually I should ask to staff, like if we were to look at closing Montreal Road or something, like a major roadway, do we have a template for what that consultation would look like, or what would that process look like from a municipal perspective?
If it was a permanent closure, there is a process that's in place. I mean, I guess the best example would be when there's construction occurs. So, you know, Montreal Road, for example, in Vanier was closed a few years ago because of construction. And I know Infrastructure Services led a very, large consultation to talk to people. I think Karina might be on the line if she wants to add to this. But again, we would go out and, have meetings with residents affected, trying to see. I know as an example, Montreal Road, we heard a lot of feedback and concerns of traffic using secondary streets. So we put in measures to try to, reduce that by moving and putting in measures like at MacArthur and Vanier Park, as actually putting a double left turn so the detour traffic was easier to get, because we really want traffic to stay on the arterial roads. So again, we would try to do that. I don't know, Karina, do you want to sort of, if there's anything else from that? But in terms of a closure for a special event, that's the other thing that we do, which maybe be closer to this. We do consultation. The organizers are required to notify the users of the street. And if it's a larger one, then there's usually, we work with public relations and media relations at the city to push that information out well in advance of the closures.
Thank you, Phil. Chair, I think Phil covered. Every project is different, every detour is different, and every community is different. So we work with the communities, we work with the ward councillors, we work with the particular situations. We understand that any of our construction projects put pressure on communities when we do detours and we close roads, but we do take into consideration the impacts to the communities, and we take into consideration the balance about moving people around, doing our job, and minimizing the impacts to the residents. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you to both of you. I guess, we should be encouraging the NCC to adopt as robust a process as the city has around temporary or perhaps in the future a permanent road closure. One of the delegations suggested some kind of a workshop process to get stakeholders together. I think that's a great idea. We do have in our official plan that in the future we'd like to reduce the importance of Colonel By and Queen Elizabeth as commuter routes and move towards more active transportation. But I think it's important that you have that dialogue with all sorts of community stakeholders to identify what the potential impacts would be, what the mitigations can be, and have that full consultation. Transit's another thing. I haven't heard a lot of discussion about transit, but I've always seen an opportunity for Queen Elizabeth and Colonel By to be better used for our OC Transpo network. I'll mention one of my pet peeves. I love being able to cycle on the Mecan Parkway in the summer, but it also adds about another 10 or 15 minutes to every commuter on OC Transpo who's not able to use the normal transit use. So we have to understand the impacts and address those. And I encourage the NCC to engage in a more robust engagement process with the city and all the other stakeholders and residents before they make any decisions for next year or long-term plans. Thanks, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Next committee member, Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Phil, for this for the presentation here. So this is there's no doubt that Queen Elizabeth and then maybe Colonel By in conjunction are fairly important commuting routes for the southern suburbs, whether it's my community, Councillor Hill, Councillor DeRoche's community, and even Manotick. So in one of the other inquiries that were submitted, and Chair, you can rule me out of order if I am, but in one of the other inquiries that were submitted, there is an agreement between the city and the NCC for us to maintain those roads in exchange for some lands that we got or something. And you know, the decrease in use can certainly be claimed as the offset in costs. Like there's less of a cost to maintain if we're not using it for part of the year or something. But do you know, it's based on that agreement, I kind of see it as a we're investing all these resources. We repave the road. We light the road. We clear it of snow and everything. Do you see it necessary to perhaps revisit that agreement, given the unilateral decision to kind of restrict that level of traffic?
In terms of the response, you know, I think the question was, you know, now that, you know, if the road's closed and we're paying for all these things, we have the ability to say, you know, no, you can't close it, and that response was no. In terms of renegotiating the agreement, again, that's you know, it's not for me to say one way or the other. I believe Taffy might be on the line to talk about what, you know, if what would be required or what we could do from that perspective, because it is a legal agreement from the early 90s. So I don't know, Taffy, do you have anything else to add on that?
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, as we have discussed this, the agreement is essentially an evergreen agreement. It's permanent in respect to the exchange that we've taken for the lands. And so as we are the owner of the lands permanently, so is the terms of this agreement. So at this point, we haven't done a deeper dive, but at this point, we would say that the agreement cannot be modified, changed, or terminated without consent of our other party, the NCC.
Thank you. And just out of curiosity, what lands are they?
It was the Coventry lands. That's what it's called, the Coventry Agreement. And it was an exchange for the lands where the baseball field is today.
Okay, thank you. So this may be more anecdotal, my own experience being a resident in the southern and in Barrhaven. I noticed that when the Queen Elizabeth driveway was closed 8 to 8 on weekdays, the afternoon commute on the highway started much earlier. So on days where I'm not on transit, you know, I would have to you know, adjust my commute, and you know, whatever, we adjust ourselves to suit changing traffic patterns. But I noticed that the highway was getting jammed up at 1:30 p.m. instead of the usual like 2:30, 3 o'clock. Has the MTO or has there been any measurement of that traffic volume change on the 417 at all, or Nicholas, in terms of relating to this closure?
No, we didn't look at that. I think just in general, traffic is getting higher and higher. And I mean, now it's almost, you know, you look at the Queensway at 4:30 and it's back to the way it was pre-COVID, where it's bumper to bumper from the split to the east, you know, in the morning, and similar from Woodruff to the west. And we see the same things leaving town in the afternoon. So we didn't specifically look at it because the majority of the people that were using it, that use it when it's open, are really coming from the south end of the city, either from your ward or Councillor DeRoche, or even further south. And so I think those would be the really people. And then what are the alternate routes that they would necessarily take? And I'm not sure they would take the Queensway. They'd probably take other roads like maybe Bronson or Bank or Main. And the challenge is we've only got a limited number, and so it just creates more congestion. We didn't do a huge study in terms of what the impacts were on all the arterial roads, because it was very focused to this. But I would expect that we probably, and you know, we saw on Bank Street an increase in traffic, so I would expect that, you know, other roads probably saw a bit more traffic from there. And this year was also a little anomaly too, because Colonel By was closed at the same time. So again, I don't think those folks would have gone on the QED. They would have probably just taken other routes to get to where they're going.
Okay, thanks very much.
Great questions. Thank you very much. First round, last committee member is Councillor Giroux. Then we have Councillor Menard, Councillor Kavanaugh, and then second round will be Councillor Troster. So Councillor DeRose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I know that we've been discussing this for a long time, but I don't want to repeat the questions and some of the very good questions. Actually, I want to thank you and thank staff for lifting this item so we'll be able to discuss it. It's very important issue and it's very important file in our community and involves so many resident and pedestrian and traffic, of course, in the whole community. But it's also, I want to make a comment, it's breath of fresh air to hear also from Mr. O'Leary and some other perspective in the community with the mobility challenge or mobility issues that they cannot. And it's nice to see it not always the same delegation coming and advocating from the same. And it's so nice, actually, encouraging to hear those comments from the resident. On the emergency side of it, I will agree with Councillor DeRoche and our chief Hutt on talking about minutes. I always say we have a challenges and response services in rural area, and I wouldn't say minutes, I would say seconds. In my community, it matters because when our response time is not efficient, life is on the line, and we save life every day. And I appreciate the chief comment on this file, but I also have a question maybe directly to Phil. Do we have some data also from the paramedic? Because I know the paramedic keep very good data from their response perspective. Have we talked to the paramedic and the police response also?
We did talk to them last year. I think the difference between the paramedic and police and fire is that the paramedic are sort of dispersed across the city. They don't, with fire, they've got a fire station right in where the closure is happening. So from their perspective, I think they did see when they got calls in those areas, they saw increased delays. I'm not sure if it was to the same amount as what we saw with fire because of the fact that fire is there. But they were able to, it's easier for them to redeploy just because, they're stationed up there. I don't know if Chief Hutt wants to add anything else to that, or I know it's not your area, but you do talk to your colleagues still.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the largest impact is, I think Phil, you mentioned it, is we just have a station situated and all of a sudden we have a road closure that's, we're talking about permanent. And I think there was a lot of dialogue today about, how can we mitigate that moving forward if it is going to be a long-term or a permanent closure. And I don't think those discussions have occurred. So I can't speak for police or paramedics colleagues, but minutes and seconds do count for what we do.
Thank you very much, Chief. And Phil, maybe while you're doing your review, if you can have those discussions, because I understand the paramedic model is different. When you deploy, you have an opportunity to change the route or look at the way that you're going to get there and take the detours and the closure in mind. So it's good to have also to know those data and the impact on those. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. We're on to, yep, you're up, Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for the presentation today. I'll have a few questions. With regard to on the fire station, and Chief Hutt, I appreciate the input today. That's extremely important. I wanted to just ask, my understanding is you did discuss with the NCC prior to this decision being made, and I think the fire service requested that it not be a 24/7 opening or closure, and the NCC agreed to that. Is that relatively accurate?
Yeah, Chair, through you. Thank you, Councillor, for that question. Yes, actually, NCC, we're very accommodating when we requested to remove the closure during the evening hours. And they did so.
Okay, thanks for that. And then in terms of that, you mentioned a 30% delay from that station. We had so much construction this past season, Chief, on Colonel By, all through Capital Ward as well as through Somerset Ward. There was a ton going on, both MTO and city construction projects. Was some of that delay as a result of that construction, or was this delay only because of that 2 kilometer stretch on the QED?
Yeah, when we looked at the data points, we actually really tried to and did our best to take the data manually and review the data to see if there could have been other significant impacts or why we were seeing some of these delays. And predominantly the data that we presented with 30% really was focused on because of the closure on Queen Elizabeth Drive.
Okay, yeah. Are you able to send that data? Just to be interesting to see. I know this has been an issue that my residents have been certainly seized with. A lot of them enjoying the opening, and a lot of them also concerned about the extra traffic on O'Connor. And so, any extra data for us is helpful. I think that's where we are trying to go with this conversation, is to have an open dialogue with the NCC about what works here and what doesn't, because I think we've had such a polarization on this issue where it's sort of all or nothing, right? Where it's, we want to completely open to cars all the time, or we want to completely open to active transportation. And that just doesn't work necessarily in this area, because we've got large events at Lansdowne, which I know the NCC accommodated as well this past summer. And we also have traffic mitigation we need to do on places like O'Connor. And so having those open kind of dialogue conversations is important. I think this issue has been raised to such a level of kind of all or nothing in our dialogue that it's not been helpful. So any extra data, Chief Hutt, would be really helpful if you could send that over to our office. With regard to our collaboration on this, Chair, I think the potential that QED represents for a good mix of active transportation, as well as obviously accommodating those things like construction impacts, which we had massive amounts of this past summer. I really want to make sure we're taking the emotion out of it and trying to get all sides on this debate so that we're collaborating effectively. So there's a lot of NCC land in Capital Ward, and our office and our community does not always agree on the decisions, but we always approach in a collaborative fashion. And so for years, we've had lighting issues along QED and Colonel By. I know now finally that issue is getting resolved after several years. But we did, in the end, project underway to repair those lights. And so those disagreements can have frictions, just as all do. But this one was elevated to such a level this year that I don't think it was actually helpful for us solving this in the future. I want us to solve these things together. And that means that we need to share, obviously, this infrastructure. This is the NCC's road, but we need to share the outcomes for residents. And so I'd rather than having kind of a standoff with other orders of government, my community really is looking for solutions. I was at the Glebe Community Association meeting this past week, and there's motivation on their end too to come up with solutions here. So we've made suggestions on how to mitigate those problems. Some of it involves, that traffic modification, some of the signage, some of the, ease of access. And that's really what I think our community is looking for. I think the statistics that we've seen, obviously, maybe just to Phil Landry, I guess the NCC has challenged some of those statistics. I don't want to get into like a huge squabbling match about those statistics, because at the end of the day, we know that there's issues that have to be solved here, and let's solve them together, right? So rather than the all or nothing approach, I don't think, and maybe city staff can just correct me, it's not city staff's position that the section from Pretoria to 5th should never be opened to active transportation. Is that correct? Or is your position actually that it should never be open to active transportation?
No, you're correct, Councillor. I mean, I think on weekends, and we've seen it in the past, it's great and it's good. I mean, I've used it with my family as well over the years. So it's not that it shouldn't be. I think the issue is during the week where you've got the folks that are, the commuters that are coming in. It just removes that one additional option, and the challenge is the impact of that is really hitting the folks that live on O'Connor Street. And that's ultimately that's the main concern, because you're now, like I said, we're what we're seeing and what we've heard is more speeding, more people not coming to full stops, and it's not a road that was built to have a couple thousand vehicles on it in a day.
Yeah, and we understand that. That's what my community wants, is a serious attempt to mitigate those impacts through the neighborhood. The statistics have been mixed, but the numbers using the QED for active transportation obviously have been good. The numbers through the community and driving down those residential streets, we're seeing some illegal maneuvers, some speeding. That's what I'm worried about, the safety of our streets, obviously. And as a city, we want to work collaboratively with city staff, the NCC. It's their road, but we need to be able to work together for our residents as a totality. So I think there's solutions here. I think there's a sweet spot we can find, especially with the hopefully not as much construction in the future. Though I know next year, Chair, Pretoria's under construction, Glebe Avenue's under construction. So we got, there was a lot on Colonel By. So we're just going to have to work together. I don't think the reactions on all sides have been proper in this way. And I really hope that this program can, work with each other, work with the neighborhood, ourselves, city staff, because I think there's important aspects of this program and that there's a lot that should continue here. And we need to take serious steps to mitigate and manage some of the traffic impacts that we've seen. So look, thanks, Chair, for the opportunity to speak today, and looking forward to working with everyone in the next while on this issue.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Menard, for your patience. And I agree this is a prickly wicket. But I do agree that working collaboratively is something that we really want. But thank you for coming out today. And I'll move to our next council member, Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Chief Hutt for being here and his presentation. I was surprised to hear that there's any delays when there's cyclists on a parkway road versus cars, which take up a lot more space and sometimes are stubborn about moving over. From my experience, I was actually on the Kitchizibby-Buchan Parkway going for a bike ride when a fire truck raced by, going the opposite direction with the raft to do a water rescue. And they just flew by, and I was so happy to, just move over. And of course, it was going to my ward to rescue somebody on the water. It was great that there was no cars there, and they flew through. So I was just puzzled that having you mentioned it was about the barriers, but is there ways to mitigate any delays? Because of course we don't want delays.
I think, thank you, Councillor. I think there's a number of opportunities we can look at. I think there's ways we can mitigate it. We worked collaboratively, as mentioned already, with the NCC about removing it during the evening hours. What we are seeing in the downtown area, we are seeing an increase of various types of calls in the downtown area. But I think there's opportunities for our team to look at different deployment models. But if we're actually having to stop ourselves to move a barricade and then go through, that's we've had situations like that as well. So that obviously delays our response, and certainly something that we could maybe look at other opportunities or ideas moving forward.
Oh, definitely. I think that sounds like something that's very very doable. I was just reading an article from about Paris, how the firefighters are actually finding quicker times due to the fact that there's more bike lanes, and so cars aren't hogging up the road. So it creates more opportunities. I think these are interesting things that we can look at. And back to the barriers, from my experience from going on the parkways, there's always somebody there at the barriers, so that they have volunteers or staff. So I was kind of surprised to hear that was an issue, that you had to move it yourself. That should not have happened, definitely. So I think we need to get some balance here, as the local councillor Menard pointed out. Emergency services are top priority, and hopefully that can be resolved. But there's one of the issues I hear about mostly for NCC, and this is just in general, is that there's not enough room for pedestrians and cyclists. So they're crowded, and the pedestrians are the ones that feel the pinch. So I hope that we can work together on this, and because those road closures give a lot of reprieve for pedestrians, and we can continue to move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Troster.
Thank you. It looks like we're finally wrapping up this item. So I want to thank staff and the committee for really taking the time to discuss this. I just wanted to make a clarification, though. I think it's problematic when we refer to cycling as recreational, safe cycling paths as recreational, as if they're optional. For 40% of the residents in my ward who do not get around by car, and for me, I am rarely cycling for recreation. I'm cycling for transportation. And so I'm really glad we had this conversation because I think we need to understand that cycling is part of our transportation network and it's a mode that we want to encourage more. And we need safer north-south arteries through our city. And I'll also say I'm pretty agnostic as to whether this would happen on Colonel By or on the QED. I'm open to conversations with the NCC about whether the QED or the other side of the canal is a better option. But I am encouraged by some of the vision that has happened in this conversation about what our waterways really could be. And just the sense of relief for so many families to be able to cycle side by side, to be able to get where we need to go and to not be frightened by cars is so important, especially to those of us that live in a high density environment and may not have access to green space. So thank you very much. I appreciate the complexity of this conversation and everyone who came to participate. And thank you to Councillor Menard for your comments about the need to really work together to not antagonize each other and to not polarize this debate, because we all want to get where we want to go. We want to do it safely. And we know that we need to encourage more sustainable modes of transportation in the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. And I always appreciate the value you bring to the conversations. I don't see any more hands up, so I'll wax on for a couple minutes if that's okay. We always look to make sure that we actually have transportation networks that work in this city. And we worked very collectively when it came to Wellington. And I think we're seeing the benefits of that. I just have a couple of quick questions for Phil, and thank you for indulging us today and presenting the information. I guess the first one is why do you feel our data is so dramatically different than the NCC's?
We collected our data more on the sort of the residential streets in the area. The NCC did collect some data last year. One of the challenges with the data they collected, it was with the eco counter, I believe it's called, a system where it can count pedestrians and cyclists, but it was basically lumped together. So we really didn't know how many cyclists, how many pedestrians were using the area. So we did work, recommend with them that, over the winter when we were chatting with them to say, if we're going to collect more data, let's do it separately in terms of knowing how many cyclists, how many pedestrians are on the road versus on the pathway. And so we collected that week's worth of data as well. But again, we're using cameras and information and analyzing it, and the data is the data, right? In terms of what it's providing, and it just we just want to make sure that any decisions that are being made or considered, are relying on data that can provide information for that, so that the right decisions are being made.
And I hate to put you in the hot seat, Phil. Did the NCC try to prevent us from capturing some of that data at some point?
Well, in late April or early May, they did indicate that they didn't want us to use their infrastructure to put our cameras, because our cameras are put on there, and they did note that if it was going to be there, they would remove it. Now, we didn't use it in the past on their infrastructure. We do have street poles and things like that in terms of infrastructure, and that's we made sure that we didn't use any of their infrastructure to collect any of that data.
So it was our infrastructure, and we captured it the appropriate way that we always do when we do traffic studies in other residential areas as well.
Yes.
I think we've heard a lot here today, and I've heard some recent new news, is that a word? That the Ottawa Gatineau Hotel Association commissioned a survey that is going to be released, I believe, today, that really speaks to what the general public feels about this. And I think those numbers are going to reflect that people see this as a very big arterial route. You might not want to call it that. And it's unfortunate that the NCC won't sit down with us and discuss in a professional manner Colonel By, something we've suggested as a compromise. It's not like the QED doesn't already have a cycling lane, if maybe they want to expand that. But at the same time, there's no discussion. And just this morning, there was a CBC story that came out, and thanks to the CBC, through access to information, with some very disparaging comments towards the city and not really wanting to work with us. I think this is a wake-up call for the NCC, and I know I've been extremely critical of them. Yeah, I really have. But there's a reason why is because I think people want us to sit down, have a discussion about this because it's becoming a very serious situation. All the things that were noted within this presentation, I hear from residents. I know people and friends that live down there. People aren't stopping at stop signs. There's tour buses, there's congestion. It's dangerous. It's not like, there's lots of children in those neighborhoods. So I do feel for the local councillor as well, because it's a difficult situation. And when I hear about a full closure and ripping out a road, I don't think that is the solution to this problem. But I do want to thank Phil and your team for collecting the data. I think this conversation will continue and we'll have to wait and see where this goes. So seeing that we're complete with this item, we have no motions. Is this item received? Thank you very much. That was a good discussion, right? All right. I like that. Thanks, Phil. Great. So at this point, we have no in-camera inquiries. Information previously distributed, none. Motions which notices have been previously given, none. We do have a notice of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting. Councillor Lowe, do you have a motion? Yeah, that's you.
Yes, I thought there were other things. So this is a notice of motion about the Barrhaven Center Park and Ride lot. So whereas for the Barrhaven Civic Complex implementation, the City of Ottawa is receiving $27.87 million from the Government of Canada and Province of Ontario through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Community Culture and Recreation Stream, the ICIP-CCR, which has a deadline for completion by the 31st of March 2027. Whereas city staff are preparing to enter negotiations to acquire property for the Civic Complex, and as part of the bundled land package, property is also being sought for the future Barrhaven LRT corridor in the vicinity of the complex, a 250-space park and ride lot, and a bus turnaround junction with the future LRT near Chapman Mills Drive. Whereas the property negotiations for the park and ride lot will pose challenges which can compromise the city's ability to meet the grant funding timelines of 2027 to build the Civic Complex. Whereas the existing park and ride lots at Strandherd, Fallowfield, and Nepean Woods have a combined 2,400 spaces, which should be adequate to serve Barrhaven residents until the future Southwest Transitway extension is in service. Whereas the council approved Southwest Transitway extension from Cambrian Road to Barnesdale Road includes a future park and ride lot at Kilburney Drive with nearly 400 spaces to serve residents in Barrhaven South and beyond. Therefore, be it resolved that staff are directed to remove the Barrhaven Center park and ride lot from city plans and cease negotiations for its land requirements. And be it further resolved that property negotiations continue for the remaining elements of the bundled land package.
So that will be for consideration at the subsequent meeting. Next, inquiries. No inquiries, so we do have other business. We do have a vice chair. I believe you have a motion to read in.
I do. Thank you, Chair. Are the rules of procedure waived? I can.
Looking around the committee, waiving the rules of procedure. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Whereas the previous Transportation Master Plan Council Sponsors Group established during the last term of council was not reestablished pending the completion of the Advisory Board Review Report, which was considered and approved by Council on July 12th, 2023. And whereas following Council's approval of the TMP Part 1 at the Council meeting of April 26, 2023, staff are preparing to launch Part 2 of the TMP. And whereas staff are seeking to reestablish the TMP Council Sponsors Group for this term of council to perform the roles and responsibilities in line with the functions of a Council Sponsors Group, as outlined in the Advisory Body Review Report, including provide ongoing advice to city staff in the development of Part 2 of the TMP, meet at appropriate times to review progress, make recommendations, and act as a sounding board. Therefore, be it resolved that the Transportation Committee recommend council reestablish the TMP Council Sponsors Group to be made up of 5 members of council with representation from the geographic regions of east, south, west, rural, and central areas of the city of Ottawa, as well as the general manager of planning, real estate, and economic development, or a designate, as well as other city staff as needed. And be it further resolved that the Transportation Committee direct the office of the city clerk to issue an expression of interest to members of council interested in being on the council sponsors group. And therefore be it further resolved that the proposed membership be brought forward for council approval by motion when this matter rises to council on October 11th, 2023. Thank you.
So on that motion, is that motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much. We're getting down to the final. We're almost there. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dudas.
Yeah, it's not, that's fine. I know it was carried and I'm happy to support it. I just wanted to, there was one line in it, and I know this is reestablishing a former sponsorship group that speaks to recommendations from the sponsors, those who are members of the group. I know that infrastructure and transportation infrastructure in specifically is such a pressing matter across the city for all of us in all of our wards. And I'm recognizing that this will be a small microcosm of us as a council. What I would just want for clarification, and I already know the answer, but I'd like to hear it, is that staff's ultimate recommendation and prioritization of transportation items for the TMP will look at the entire city, that it'll take into all account, and that the members of this group, and I will put my name up, and whether I am selected or not, that'll be a matter. But once again, that it won't be that they'll be prioritized over the entirety of the city. Once again, I already know the answer, but I'd like to just hear it.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, definitely. And we will be consulting with the public and all councillors as part of our engagement process, and it'll come to committee and council for approval.
Absolutely.
Part 2.
Thank you very much.
Great. So just again to firm it up, is that carried? Thank you, everybody. And final piece of the puzzle, we're looking to add on, what is this one? Adding new item to the agenda, all-way protected permitted left turn signal intersection at Bank and Mitch Owens. Looking at around the committee, is okay to add to the agenda? Thank you. Councillor DeRuse, did you wish to read into motion?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, on that report, I want to thank you and thank my colleague actually for considering this item. Some of you may know this item have been considered bringing forward before. This is a location near Greeley, which has a lots of safety concern, and left turn signal would help eliminate cars rushing through yellow lights. We previously have spent hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars on this intersection, and it likely would have been cheaper to do it at this time. But again, it didn't meet the warrant, and I understand staff have their guideline. They need to follow it, but that does not always fairly represent the safety concern of the resident. As the key things to consider, that this intersection is in a school zone. Yeah, and believe it or not, it's with St. Mary Elementary School right at the intersection. So we put pedestrian, cycling, traffic right in front of it, and could increase and create so much safety for the cyclists and for pedestrian. And this intersection also connects all the ends of the city. In fact, not only my resident, most people who travel on Mitch Owens and Bank Street, they know this is right on Highway 31 and Mitch Owens, and it's a truck route. So I don't want these changes to be shut down because of $15,000 budget cuts, and I cannot wait for next year to the implementation. This is potentially might have some tragic incident occur on that intersection, and I don't want to really to wait to react after the fact. Some of you may say, George, you have a fund from your TTC, but my ward, I have to remind you, it's over 700 kilometers of road. I have 10 villages that I'm responsible to be able to implement TTC initiative in it, and I don't have enough money to be able to implement the requests that come from my community. And sometimes councillors know what items may help the community, like Councillor Trosters, which items she brought forward to protect her communities. And I really commend her for that, because many of you as councillors sit at the committee, Councillor Gower and Kit and Lulaf and all of you. You know what your community need, and you know the safety measure we need to take. So I really appreciate, and I hope that you can support me on this. I don't ask much, and I'm not begging for this, but this is really important to put the life of the resident for $15,000. That's something we can really eliminate, and we don't have to wait to an incident to happen for us to implement that. So I really appreciate it, and it is time sensitive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I was going to ask you to read the actual item, but therefore be resolved that the Transportation Committee approve the addition of the report for consideration by committee at today's meeting. That being said, I did want to ask one question to Phil. There's been words that this might be queue jumping. This isn't queue jumping, that's correct?
No, because it doesn't meet the warrant, so it's not like it's on a list like we would see with the new signal program or our PXO program where it meets the warrants and it gets bumped up. It's basically just a concern that the residents and the council brought forward. We've done our studies. The left turns can make the movement within the green ball, the majority of them, but there's a concern in terms of, especially when the light first turns green, for the residents to be able to make the left turn before the opposing through goes through. So.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Looking on the board, we have Councillor Bradley and then Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Are we allowed to ask questions to the request or just if whether or not we're accepting this on the agenda?
No, this is added to the agenda. We're actually talking about the specific motion.
Okay. I'm just trying to draw my memory from when this first came forward, but my understanding was that there were multiple projects that met warrants for this type of signal that weren't being funded because we didn't have resources. So this might not be queue jumping because it doesn't meet the warrants, but is that not true that there are other projects across the city that have met warrants that we can't fund at this time?
Through you, Chair, no. The comment that we did in the report back in the spring was that should there be locations that do meet warrants this year that may cause them to bump, but we're getting late into the year now and we don't have any new locations, so it won't be bumping any warranted locations from that perspective. So we just didn't know that back in the spring because we get numerous requests all the time, and some do meet the criteria, and then we use the funding to fund that.
So what is the funding source for this? Sorry, if you could just remind me.
It's funded through the Safety Improvement Program. There's, I think, about $85,000 that's set aside every year for doing this, along with other signal modifications. So, in terms of work being postponed for next year tied to this program, we don't see this at this point of the year.
So do staff support the installation of this despite it not meeting the warrants?
No, no, that's why we bring the report to committee. I mean, we have our guidelines and warrants in terms of when they're required. As we noted in the report, we did studies. We've done numerous studies at this location where the cars can get through. Now, the left turning cars have to wait for the opposing traffic to go through, and there's always gaps in traffic. But there are concerns from residents that the higher speeds on the road and also the concern of waiting for the gaps can be concerning. Again, that's why the reports, because if the location met the warrants for the left turn arrow, we wouldn't be at committee today. We'd have just implemented like we do with other measures.
So the staff position hasn't necessarily changed in terms of whether it's warranted, but we have extra money left over in this program and no requests on the books that meet the warrants. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, we have money this year that we're not using for other locations, so we're not bumping locations to next year. Does that answer the question?
I guess, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, the recommendation that Transportation Committee recommend that Council approve the installation of the protected permanent left phasing in all directions at the intersection of Bank and Mitch Owens. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much for everyone's support. Sorry, I'm a little scrambled eggs today. I had a busy night last night at a community association event. So that being said, I'm looking in our agenda, unless Caitlin scolds me and says, no, there's more to do. I think we're pretty much done. All right, thumbs up. So adjournment, the next meeting will be October 26, 2023. Thank you very much for a very productive meeting today, everybody.
Thanks, Chair.